right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. If you love stories, or better yet, if you can't get enough stories about the strangeness, the mystery, and the synchronicity of life, well, then you've come to the right place. Because today I have the pleasure of presenting to you my interview with Trish and Rob MacGregor, best-selling authors of Synchronicity and the Other Side, The 7 Secrets of Synchronicity, and their brand new book, Sensing the Future. Trish and Rob share some fascinating and mind-bending accounts of how people, both well-known or not known at all, have seemingly pierced the mysterious veil of time and space, and how they've been able to glimpse the future through what is called precognition. Some of these stories will warm your heart, and others, well, might disturb you. Either way, you'll come out of this with another piece of the puzzle of reality, and that is we are connected to everything and everyone. Take a listen. Rob and Trish, I can't believe it's been 3 years, almost to the day, synchronistically, since we last chatted, and I'll never forget that interview. And just so you know, audience, I consider this dynamic duo the gurus of synchronicity, and as many of you know, this is one of my favorite subjects. Today, we're going to be discussing Rob and Trish's latest book, fresh off the presses, just released, called Sensing the Future, How to Tap Your Intuition and Read Signs from the Universe to Predict What's to Come. So let's get right into it, you two. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, Alexis.
Hello, thank you.
And Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, listen, you're both obviously accomplished writers and explorers of consciousness, and I'm always amazed that your material never gets old. Never, ever. There's always something new to impart. There's always something new to be gleaned from your tireless research. But I want to ask you to start off, with all of your years of research into these great subjects, do you ever cease to be amazed with what you learn?
What we have through the research is we uncover more questions. It's like none of this stuff is ever answered entirely, don't you think?
Yeah, and it's just the process itself of writing. It's, I'm working on another book right now and working on a chapter that deals with hauntings, haunting experiences, the chapter is called. And as I started it, I got 2 emails from relatives, a second cousin and a cousin, who don't speak to each other, and I haven't spoken to one of them for decades, and they both sent me ghost stories. I mean, it was incredible.
It was like the law of attraction or something.
Well, I want to get into that, you two, because again, I never cease to be amazed when I'm listening to the stories that you tell and how synchronicity is so interwoven in just your day-to-day life. I want to get into that. Maybe I'll get right into it. I wanted to ask you this. The fact that you spend so much time researching and writing and conversing about synchronicity, I wonder, is that in and of itself perhaps priming you to become more in sync, literally, with life? In other words, when you read a book and you're studying it so intently, and then you go to bed and you dream about it, you become so enmeshed in it, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that over the years that's happened to the two of you? That
Definitely.
More synchronicities have happened?
Definitely. Just the creative process is just related to synchronicity, precognition. We have things happen all the time. I'm just thinking something, and then Trish will say it. She's in the next room, and I don't even mention it anymore. That I was saying. I was just thinking that very thing, and it wasn't anything we had been talking about, So that it just happens all the time, and it just.
In fact, I think that one of the chapters we have in the book is called Painting the Future, and it's about how writers, artists, musicians often tune into the future through their creativity. Like if you're a novelist, for instance, and you're really plugged into the story you're writing, chances are quite often that you also may tap easily into a future event.
I agree with you. In fact, I wanted to get to that a little bit later, go into that a little bit more about the musicians that you cited that synchronistically, ironically, and in often cases tragically lost their lives, but somehow it was presaged in the lyrics that they came out with. But I want to elaborate on that a little bit later. Let me start with a quote that, as I was reading the back of your book, of course, I was cracking up, by Whitley Strieber. If there's one man that knows and is a true explorer of the true nature of reality, I would say is Whitley Strieber. This is what he said on the back of your book. He says, quote, "Conventional wisdom claims that we can't tell the future. In this exciting and empowering book, Trish and Rob MacGregor take the conventional wisdom and put it where it belongs, right in the trash."
Yeah,
I love it. I said, oh, this is going to be fun as soon as I read that. So let me ask you, when did you both realize that so-called conventional wisdom was anything but wisdom?
Gee, you mean like when I was 4?
Yeah.
I mean...
Well, we've always had an interest, both of us, just a natural interest in mysteries of the unknown, the paranormal. And then we started, as we grew up, finding out that everyone didn't have this interest, and actually a lot of people didn't believe it, and science and the mainstream science and the mainstream media denigrated things that we believed in. So, it's, in fact, when we were, before we met, we both had these interests, but we kind of did it secret because there was nobody around us who really had these same interests. And we were both reading Seth books, and we didn't have anyone to talk to about these books, and nobody knew what they were or had any interest in them. And then when we met, I was a newspaper reporter, and I interviewed Trish for a story, actually, and we got talking after the interview. And
I was teaching English to Cuban refugees, so that's why he
told me
interviewed
that
me.
before.
Yeah.
Right. And I was writing an article about it was 3 years after the Mario boat lift and what was happening with the Mariolitos. And so we started talking afterwards, and somehow Seth came up, and we suddenly found someone who had read these Seth books that were coming out year after year.
I wish we had met then, because I think I was running into the same thing. I think you may have tackled the Seth material a little bit before me, but I understand. I do. There is that sense of the lonely journey that,
right.
What planet am I from?
And there's always been, I found, people that I've connected with who are familiar with Seth end up becoming close friends, over the years. And just because you have a basis,
right.
for the friendship in terms of your worldview.
Right.
And some of that stuff in the first Seth book especially, it seemed very exotic. But now with quantum physics, it seems to be becoming quite the norm.
That book I call perennial, not that book, that voluminous work by Jane Roberts, I call perennial philosophy, really, because in later years we found, that so many, including quantum physics, have really just connected in so well, really put a lot of puzzle pieces together. So, yeah. Well,
I mean, the whole basis of Seth is we create our own realities through our beliefs, our intentions, our thoughts. And that's pretty big when you think about it.
It is. And I think it's one of those things, I know for me, we're going to make this a Jane Roberts Seth talk, perhaps, because I told you yesterday I could talk about Seth all day long, and I still quote him frequently. I'm losing my voice, forgive me. But the YCYOR, you create your own reality. One of, for those in the audience that may have, may be familiar with the Seth material, you may relate to this idea that I know for me, my parents had some of the Seth books, and I was inquisitive about it, but no, yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in an alternative household. That's a whole nother story.
Oh, that's no wonder.
Oh, yeah. Seth Speaks was on my mom's shelf for years. In fact, it was the old paperback with an image of Jane Roberts making this very sort of creepy looking face.
And I remember expression.
I was so scared to open the book because I had no context for what it was about. But when I did start to understand some of the themes that were in the work, I said, I'm going to tackle this work one day. But I think I kind of waited or intuit at a time when I would tackle this material. And when I did, there was no looking back. So just incredible. Well, I want to talk about your book today. That's what we're going to get into. And Seth is mentioned in the book, by the way. I want to talk about, I mean, you're all about synchronicity and precognition, and this book really focuses on precogs for short.
Like Minority Report.
Yeah, and you mentioned that. Right,
Yeah.
right. But here's what I want to talk about. There seems that there may at least be, at first blush, a fine line between synchronicity and precognition. Then there are other explanations that say they're one and the same, and you actually referenced that. I've always wondered, Rob and Trish, as I've gone through my own myriad synchronicities, whether the actual meaningful event that takes place was my sensing the future, or did I somehow conjure the event by simply thinking of it? What are your thoughts on that?
It's so close when you synchronicity, telepathy, precognition. They're sometimes interchangeable in different situations. We look at synchronicity as like an umbrella of other aspects of the paranormal, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, etc. But sometimes they're just really interchangeable. But one of the things I've noticed that when we mention our book and talking to people who don't necessarily have a great interest in this area, that a lot of people don't, it's surprised us, a lot of people don't know haven't heard the word precognition or don't know the meaning of that word. And so we mention premonition or omens, and immediately there's a fear factor. They think, if you think about something that's going to come true, it's going to be negative. So that's a real thing that we've come across with people who don't really have a general interest in the subject.
Yeah, we did an informal survey one day at the dog park. Because you've got all different kinds of people that come there with their dogs, and so I just went around and said, "Do you know what precognition is?" No. I said, sensing the future, a hunch, something's going to happen. Oh, an omen, you mean?
Premonition.
A premonition.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Well, you know what I think that speaks to, guys? That speaks to, how society or pop culture has really sort of, what I say, bastardized these words, these concepts. And so many words have these not connotations, but these stigmas because of the way they've been presented, oftentimes in a fiction context. And I mean, I've asked people, do you know what synchronicity is? And they've said no. And I'm like, really? Are you kidding?
Yeah, but they know what coincidence means.
But they know what coincidence means. Right, yeah.
But usually they think of coincidence as meaningless, which is the opposite of synchronicity.
Yeah. Well, I say coincidence is the coinciding of two incidents to bring about meaning. Mm-hmm. It is a coincidence, really.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of really immediate precognitions. Like the other day, I was having lunch with a woman who was a former neighbor, and she goes, "Oh, Trish, I got the best precog for you." So I said, "Okay, what happened?" Well, apparently her father got a drone for Christmas. So she and the family, a large family, were sitting outside in the backyard Christmas Day, drinking wine, watching the father try to fly this drone. And Melissa had a feeling that the drone was going to hit her wine glass. So she set it down on the table, and she said seconds later, that's exactly what happened. So that's a precog where, the timing between the event and the feeling is so close that it could just be a synchronicity. But she said, no, this was a precognition because I acted. I set the glass aside away from me.
Yeah, and a lot of people have an ability to see the future about 2 seconds in front of the event happening.
Like this one.
Like we've had instances where it slammed on the brake just for no reason, and just suddenly avoided an accident of a car coming out of things like that happened. And I think that's pretty common, but people might think that was close and just kind of let it go. And we had a neighbor or a friend who was very logical in her orientation, and she had one of those experiences, but she tried to explain it logically that there was something in the environment that she must have sensed subconsciously that was there, so that it was she didn't want to accept it as intuitive.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, and that this is, I suppose, in the category of cognitive dissonance associated with people and things that seem outside of the norm, and this incessant need to explain it away. That's a whole other subject,
right.
and a very interesting topic as well. Well, you mentioned the time frame and having a precog happen anywhere from a couple of seconds before to, in some cases, years before.
Uh-huh.
Have you both taken any data in terms of what the most common time frame between someone receiving a precognitive message and the actualization of what is gleaned? What has your research shown in that regard?
It spans the spectrum. It differs just like we differ. Everybody's different. Everybody's unique. So the way you experience precognition just depends on, I think, your mindset, how open you are, how receptive you are.
And for a lot of people who don't think of themselves as naturally precognitive, it can relate to some dramatic event in their lives or
some major turning point
or world events, such as 9/11. There were so many people who had precognitive dreams of planes flying into the World Trade Center or things very similar to that. People charging down the street near Wall Street, and so they may not have ever thought of themselves as having being able to see the future, but dreams are one way that we
most common.
We work around that logical mind because we're beyond that, or we're underneath it in our dream world.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Now, there was there's a novelist named Randy Russell who lives in Asheville, and he wrote in one of I think it was his first novel, he named a character after his closest friend. And in the book, the character, who was the bad guy, got shot and killed. Well, the book got published. It came out around Thanksgiving. His friend was, I think it was like the night before Thanksgiving, his friend had to get to the post office to mail off some invitations for some church event. And somebody pulled up outside the post office and shot him. Now, exactly what happened in the book, but he didn't die. Instead, he drove himself to the hospital and was in critical care for weeks. But there, he says he's never again named a character after anyone he knows. But there's an instance of tuning into something through your creative process.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Trish, because I think that's a big factor here in all of the things that we're talking about. I wanted to talk about the role of creative imagination, whether it's conscious or even unconscious, many times unconscious, and the role that might play. Maybe we can go there right now. There's just so much, and there's so many connect points into this. I mean, we could talk about David Bohm, whom I also love, who is a part of Michael Talbot's holographic universe, and his whole implicate and explicate order, and what role does tapping the implicate order play in playing these things out, and then where does creative imagination come in? I mean, there's just so many connect points here.
Well, David Bohm, I love Bohm.
Yeah,
I think if he were still alive, he would be one of my favorite people to sit down with and just talk. Let me milk your head, know?
Exactly.
But I mean, his whole contention was that the implicate order is the enfolded order. It's the hidden order.
Right.
And out of that, everything else is born, even space and time. And the explicate order is the external daily life that we see. And that maybe synchronicity, precognition, and all these various aspects of the paranormal exist along the border between the two.
When people sense the future, Bohm said what they were doing was anticipating events, but not necessarily seeing any kind of set event was coming, but anticipating. And sometimes those events didn't happen because what they anticipated they didn't like, and they changed circumstances.
They changed it,
and so it didn't have to happen.
Or changing timelines. This brings about the whole idea of simultaneous time in different timelines, all playing out on some level.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that if you can have a precognition, and if you don't like what it is, you can change it. You know, you can change the future. Now, maybe you can't change 9/11, but if you were, say, going to be anywhere in the vicinity of the World Trade Center on 9/11, and you had a precog about it, you could change that.
Okay.
Here's a good quote by Bohm here. When people dream of accidents correctly and do not take the plane or ship, it is not the actual future that they were seeing. It is merely something that is in the present, that is which is implicate and moving towards making that future.
Interesting. Enfolded. It's still enfolded.
Right.
Well, I mean, obviously this has quantum implications, because when you talk about wave-particle duality, they're both coexisting. The wave you would look at, I would suppose, as the implicate or still enfolded as a probability, and the explicate, of course, being the particle that it's been made manifest or actualized.
Exactly.
But they're not in a linear. We tend to think if that's the case, the wave would come first, and then the actualization or the particle after. But they both coexist. So does that make sense?
And see, that's very Sethian too.
Oh, sure. It all is connected. Absolutely. Wow.
I mean, I had an experience with this creativity thing back in 1992. I had mailed off a manuscript to my editor at Hyperion, and it was called Storm Surge. And it was about a Category 5 hurricane named Alfonso that slams into South Florida, flattens neighborhoods, and devastates the coast. On the same day I mailed the manuscript, back then you didn't have email, a tropical wave moved off the coast of Africa, and 10 days later, on August 24th, about the time the editor was reading the manuscript, that wave became Hurricane Andrew. There were so many similarities between what I'd written about in Storm Surge and actual Hurricane Andrew that afterwards I said to Rob, I'm never again writing about hurricanes. I feel like I had tapped into something and it scared me.
Yeah.
And she did it again.
Yeah, and then I did it again, though, in 2005, and the same damn thing happened.
And the same thing happened. Well, this, again, it's really just almost too bizarre to, it's difficult to imagine, but these things seem to happen so frequently, particularly when we're talking about creative types, people that create scenarios, create storylines, create characters. It makes me wonder, Rob and Trish, we talk about precognition as glimpsing something that, at least on the surface, is outside of us, or something that is on some level predetermined to happen. Now, I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's how it's looked at in some circles. My question is, again, are we more than precogging something, but at the same time creating it? In other words, in sort of Jungian terms and even Sethian terms, we are the unconscious co-creators of reality. Are we actually creating these circumstances, thinking they're precogs, and we're actually the architects?
That could very well be.
But the funny thing, or not funny thing, is the odd thing is, though, if we're creating these, sometimes they are not things we really want to create. For example, a comic book writer named Dave Mensch, he was working for Marvel Comics on a Planet of the Apes comic book series, creating original stories. And he was just completing a scene in one of the comics about a black hooded gorilla named Brutus. And in the scene, Brutus invades the hero's home, grabs the man's partner by the neck, and held a gun to her head as a way to manipulate the hero. So he hears a call from the living room, and his wife's voice is kind of strange. So he goes to see what's going on, and there in the living room is a man in a black hood holding a gun to his wife's head with his arm around her neck. Exactly what he was writing about. So, it's
and as a result of that experience, he had writer's block, or whatever, like a creative block for a long time. He was afraid to do anything.
Isn't that interesting? I think we're onto something here. There's something really there's something really powerful going on, and it really just, I mean, we could take the rest of the conversation and just focus in on that. I think it really just kind of shows how powerful we are, how we are innately creators, with the ability to consciously, well, in many cases it's unconsciously. That's the problem. We want to become conscious creators of our reality. You create your own reality consciously. But if that's not, evidence enough that there's something about the power behind and the energy behind the creative process that has the ability to manifest on the 3D level. Are you familiar with Henri Corbin, a French philosopher that talked about the imaginal realm?
I don't think so. I'm not.
No.
Oh, good. Somebody can read. Somebody knew. What's his last name?
Corbin, Corbin. He wrote a paper on the imaginal, and somewhat similar to, I suppose, Bohm's implicate order. Mm-hmm. He believed that the imaginal was a dimension sort of enfolded or shielded from the 3D, but a place or an energy, a spectrum that could be accessed by anyone.
Wow.
And creation happens there. And depending on that process of what you go through to take it out of the imaginal, you can bring it into the manifest world using certain processes. So,
see, that sounds Sethian. I mean, I think these different people are they're all saying basically the same thing.
Absolutely.
Just in different ways.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about, speaking of creating, I want to talk about your daughter, Megan, because she's a great subject. Even from the time she was a child. Now I know she's an adult now, right?
Yeah, she's 27.
Oh, wow. Well, I think
she's our experiment, but don't tell her.
Well, if she happens to listen.
Our greatest creation.
She sounds lovely. But it sounds like she's an innate creator. And I want to reference in your book, you have this great story about when I think she was in the 3rd grade maybe, and she had a class assignment. The whole class had a Thanksgiving assignment before Thanksgiving break to create from clay an image that represented something that they were grateful for. And she created, everybody, gotta hear this clay sculpture of a dog. A red golden retriever, was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the thing is, she didn't have one. But she's creating this thing this animal that she didn't have but was grateful for. So as the story goes, it turns out that Megan did later get this dog through a serendipitous event. I think it was
weeks later.
Right.
Isn't that something?
And when she stood up in front of the class, she said, "I'm grateful for the golden retriever I'm going to get."
Oh,
and we looked at her. We looked at each other. What? We didn't know about any golden
Brilliant.
retriever.
I think that's a heavy teacher. So the first thing that struck me was gratitude. There's something about gratitude, and I don't mean the recitation of saying thank you, but literally feeling the energy as if you already have something. We've heard this before.
Right.
What did you kind of muse into when that whole thing happened?
Well,
from that
it was very funny because Rob and I looked at each other and we thought we didn't have a dog. We didn't want a dog. We had 3 cats. And then a friend of Megan's her father was like a security officer in a school. And he had been training this golden retriever who washed out of a drug sniffing program. And he said, this dog really needs a home. So Megan says, can we take the dog? Can we take the dog? Can we take the dog? So we said, all right, we'll take the dog for a few days, see how she gets along with the cats. The dog just strolled into the house, met the cats, flopped down in front of Rob's desk, and stayed for 11 years.
Isn't that something?
And Megan really understands the whole thing about gratitude. Mm-hmm. I mean, she practices the same kind of stuff we do.
That's beautiful. We can learn. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
Another story related to Megan is that we were on a trip in Asheville, and she bought a ceramic plate, and she decided she wanted to give it to her roommate just because she is grateful for their relationship and that they were living together, and she really liked this house that they were living in. It was near downtown Orlando, but it was also on a lake and an acre of property and a very reasonable price. And so she bought the plate, and she decorated with, she put on the plate, Megan and Aaron, friends forever. Well, a couple, maybe a month or so later, or a few weeks later, we were back up in Orlando to visit Megan, and we noticed that the plate was chipped, and Megan said, "Oh, yeah, something hit it. I'm going to glue it." And then even later, a couple of weeks later, we saw her again, and the plate was now in 6 pieces, and the glue was next to it. And she said, "Yeah, we put it in the dishwasher, and it just shattered." And I thought, this is a sign. This, something's going to happen.
And she's not going to be able to renew her contract.
She was just coming to the end of the lease, and everything was fine. But then suddenly, the parents got involved, the family got involved. Because her father owned the house, and suddenly she had to tell Megan, "You're going to have to move. My brother's going to move in."
Oh my goodness!
So, and Megan and I didn't want to recognize that this was any sort of sign, but Rob kept saying, "I really think it is. I really think it is," and he was right.
Isn't that something? That's in your book as well. Yeah, that's something. I still, as I listen to the multitude of stories that you all tell. Are you still there?
We're
okay. It sounded like I lost you there. I'm like, Mercury retrograde's over. We shouldn't be going through this, but it got a little too quiet. Okay. But let's see if I can regain my train of thought here. The multitude of stories that you all have to share about your own lives, you, Rob, Megan, do you think that there is some sort, perhaps, of a family link with people that have this propensity for synchronicities and precogs?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. But because Trish and I are from families that are quite different in that respect. My parents were both into the paranormal. Trish's parents were not.
No.
And they were very skeptical, especially her mother, which is kind of surprising. But Trish always had the interest in it in spite of that. And she has a good friend from Columbia who's the same way, whose parents are or especially the mother, is very religious and thinks everything that she's dealing with is related to the devil and demons. And
my mother wasn't that bad.
Yeah, no, your mother.
My mother was just a skeptic.
Yeah, just a skeptic. But I think it varies from family to family. If that is inherent in who you are coming into, where we've chosen these parents for particular reasons, and maybe that particular reason wasn't why Trish came in with them as her parents.
That's interesting. I'm sure there's so many different scenarios, but it just dawned on me clearly there's a link between the three of you.
Well, there definitely is.
Yeah.
It was funny. When I was pregnant with Megan, I asked I was doing this real Sethian thing. I said, okay, I'd like to have a dream where I know what the past life was that we shared that's connected to this life that she's coming into. And I dreamed I was in a warehouse all by myself. My water broke. Megan was born, and I picked her up, and she opened her eyes, and she said, "Iceland." I thought, Iceland? I woke up from this dream. I've never had any desire to go to Iceland, but after that I did. And some years later, she was in college. She was studying with a medium. And so Rob and I decided we'd go to have readings with this medium. And during the reading, I asked this woman, I told her about this dream. And I said, I've always been puzzled about what it meant. And she really did go into trance. Her eyes did the REM thing back and forth. And when she started speaking, it was in a slower tone of voice. And the story was that the past life that Iceland referred to was in Northern Europe. Rob and I were a brother and sister, and Megan was an aunt. Our parents had died. She took us in and made us members of her family, even though it was a really difficult life for her because there wasn't enough money. She was taking care of a lot of kids, et cetera, et cetera. So this life was payback for her for that. Our payback to her.
Isn't that something?
Isn't it?
And when you think that is oh my goodness, that's a beautiful story. Obviously, did you share that story with Megan, and did she seem to have any resonance with it?
That's a good question. You know, I don't think I've been telling her these stories since she was old enough to know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So it's hard. I have to ask her.
And see, it might trigger a remembrance in her. Like, yeah, that's right.
Might.
Isn't that interesting?
Herself, and in fact, it was while in college was studying with this medium, which was. Some of her friends in college thought she was kind of wacky to be going off and instead of studying or hanging out with her friends, she was going off driving 25 miles to meet this medium in rural Central Florida.
She sounds like someone that I would love to meet. That's something that I would do. I think that's great. That's great. Well,
yeah, I mean, even now she says, "Mom, I don't talk about my beliefs to most guys."
Yeah.
She's very into the Hicks.
The Abraham Hicks stuff, which is also very Sethian.
Right, it is. Indeed. I think some of us are just have this natural interest and proclivity toward these subjects, and I don't know that there are people that perhaps can be converted to an extent to have an interest in some of these things, but I do. The stories that I hear, including from yourselves, it seems like we came here with it. We just
it does.
Yeah, very interesting. And you both again. And I'm gonna plug your website right now because, by the way, everyone, if you want to just dive deep into the world of synchronicity, I want you to go to Rob and Trish's website, which is it synchrosecrets.com.
But the place where we post almost daily is blog.synchrosecrets.com.
Okay. We'll make sure to have a link to that because it's a treat and it's updated so frequently, and you get to hear other people's stories and comments about those stories and of course, Rob and Trish's own stories. It's great. Really, really is chock full of great stuff. Let's talk about, I want to get into, because your Sensing the Future book spends a great deal of time getting into how we can start, if we can, to regulate this process of sensing the future. I want to quote Michael Talbot. We've mentioned him briefly. Love the late Michael Talbot, of course, who wrote The Holographic Universe. He
really set a precedent with that book.
He sure did. And I still refer to it.
I do too.
And it was really through that book that I learned about the work of, among others, David Bohm.
About Seth?
Well, no, about David Bohm.
Oh, right.
And Carl Pribram, and et cetera. But he said something in an interview, I'll never forget, it always stuck with me. He said, we are like iceberg beings. Most of us is beneath the surface. Now, you both contend that we can access what's beneath the surface to become more hyper-aware of the so-called future. But how, if you were to explain how that might, how we could proactively start getting beneath the surface, how would you explain that?
Synchronicity is one. Synchronicity is that point between the underlying reality when events from the underlying reality come to our everyday reality. It's the point where they meet, and just being aware of
it's awareness.
Awareness is a big part.
That's
being aware of coincidences that happen in your life, and see how you can find meaning in those coincidences. It's just today, Trish was in a little incident here in the kitchen. We're talking about this book that. It's
a book of ghostwriting.
Right, and the person she's been working with has been kind of slow, and we were just thinking finally she's starting to move, and suddenly we had something on the stove, and we had a cover on it, and some of the grease splattered, and flames shot up from the stove just as we were talking about.
I grab it and throw it in the sink. I really thought we were going to have a fire in here.
Oh my goodness!
It shot up a good 2 feet.
So Rob said, "What were you thinking about?" I said, what were you talking about? So I told him. He goes,
Things are
so just like things like that. In other words, there aren't any accidents. Not that I'm saying that you have to pay attention to every little thing that happens, but like the broken plate incident, the fire. There's just stuff in your personal environment that are clues.
Mm-hmm.
It's an accident, but it has meaning.
Right. Like one time, give you another quick example. I was at a book fair. I think it was like the Southern Book Fair or whatever the actual name is. And a friend and I had gone there to promote a book we had written on the tarot. So Phyllis and I go up to our room, and we're washing up to go downstairs to see where our booth is. And all of a sudden she squeals, "A bee bit me. A bee stung me." I said, "A bee? How did a bee even get in here? Nothing was open." She goes, "Who cares how it got in here? What does it mean?" Well, I think we both knew that we were going to, quote, get stung somehow during this conference, which I might add was during a Mercury retrograde. And sure enough, our books never showed up.
Wow.
The bee knew.
The bee, well...
A book signing with no book.
Yeah,
a book signing with no book. You got stung. Interesting.
So,
Well,
it's things like that.
yeah. Because you really, really do enunciate that in the book over and over again. In fact, you talk about comparing the outer world of symbols and signs, or using it as a sort of counterpart to the symbols and signs that are shown in our dreams. Dreams seem to be, they're definitely chock full of signs and symbols, and there are many of them in our outer world as well. But how I could see perhaps somebody who's intent on sharpening their pencil when it comes to recognizing the signs, but they start seeing every little thing as a sign and symbol, which can maybe be a little confusing. How might one learn to discern, I guess, is the
that could
question.
be a little OCD, actually.
That's the tricky part. I'm thinking of a story a man told me where he had a dream of his cabin slipped off the foundation of his house. And he said, I've got to go there. It's a 2-hour drive. I've got to take off work and go see what happened. I said, listen, this is probably symbolic. It's probably, something in your life that feels, or it's something that's coming that's a little bit off the foundation of who you are, some shift. And he thought about that. He said, "No, I'm going to still go." And so he drove 2 hours. Thought, this is going to be a useless trip. He got there, and one of the concrete blocks in the corner had actually slipped. The cabin was actually in danger of tilting to one side. So that was something that was a precognitive event. So
Rob was wrong.
Yeah. So it's how you interpret it, and the best person for interpreting your dreams is yourself, and that was a good example of that.
Isn't that something? Wow. Isn't that something? Well, there are a lot of prompts, I suppose, in the outer world that can be used. You also talk about nature, I think, in that regard, really, and I think that's a fascinating thing, and I think it's just it's a natural process because we are of nature. Looking at trees, and sometimes I'll look at the sway of a tree. I'll ask a question and kind of read the movement of a tree, or birds. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Now, have you written about the sort of omens, I guess you could call it, or sort of symbols and signs associated with birds?
A psychic friend and I wrote a book called Animal Totems, where we wrote just about, if you have an experience with an animal, what it could possibly mean. But I find that what's most useful is to do your own research. If you have an experience like the thing with the bee was so spontaneous that Phyllis and I both knew immediately what it was referring to. However, how about the sparrow story?
The swallows.
The swallows. Yeah.
We had an experience where we were driving across Florida because Megan was going to college in Sarasota. We were living near West Palm Beach. And so right across the center of the state. And we would always be right around dusk as we were coming home. And there would always, in this one area of about 10-mile stretch, there would always be these swallows just diving, hundreds of them. We'd always be fascinated by them because they had come so close to the car and just sweep by, and they always seemed to have some kind of radar where they wouldn't hit us. This one trip, bang, one of them hit us, and a minute later, bang, another one hit the windshield. 2 swallows, and so we said, what does that mean? 2 swallows. So where we were happened to be about 10 miles or so from where, was it in 2 weeks Megan was going to?
11 days.
11 days. Megan was going to jump out of an airplane in a parachute. Tandem jump. So, we didn't put it together right then, but so 11 days later, we went there to watch her. She was the last one out of the plane.
First of all, they're supposed to leave at jump at 12:30. They didn't jump until 2. The 2 is a big thing here because it was her 20th birthday. 2 swallows, tandem jump.
Yeah, 11 days after.
11 days.
And, but this is all stuff we figured out in the aftermath, though, but it all fit together. Well, what happened is she jumped and the parachute didn't open. And so we were standing right next to a trainer, and he says, "That's interesting. I've never seen that before. The chute didn't open." And we said, "What?" And then the secondary chute opened up, and they came down hard, but they were both okay. But that's where we started putting it all together about it was a precognition about the swallows.
But we didn't know.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. We didn't know until after the event had happened.
And that's just like the planetary empaths we write about, the people who have different sensations in their body that aren't related to any illness, but they suddenly their ears are buzzing, their eyes are watering, they're choking up, and they know that it's related to some major catastrophe, some event that's either human made or natural. And they'll start writing us on our blog, and we'll be collecting these, and but nobody knows what it is, where it is, and then suddenly,
something will happen.
We must have had at least a half a dozen of them just before that devastating earthquake that hit Haiti, and
also before the Boston Marathon.
Yeah.
Did you really?
And so, being a planetary empath is not a fun thing, though, because these are painful situations that can go on for days. But when the event happens, suddenly they clear up.
But see, I think these people could be trained to say, okay, this is going to be a volcano or volcanic eruption. This is going to be a flood. In other words, if you have this innate ability to feel these symptoms that are planetary in nature, couldn't they be trained in some way so that they could fine-tune them? I mean, that would be pretty cool.
I think that, it's interesting. Synchronistically, I was going to ask you on the heel of that, because I wanted to mention the planetary empaths, and thank you, Rob, for explaining that, because you go into that in great detail in your book. I think there are a lot of people that are and didn't have a name for it until now. But my question is, do you think being empathic is a gift or a curse? And I don't know if it's an either or, but in any case, might we, as an empathic type of person, be able to control the information a little bit more and even know how to turn it off at times?
Well, the planetary empaths we've talked to, part of the frustration is that they can't turn it off. They would like to be able to, but it's as if once they connect with whatever the energy is that's coming up, they just have to go with it.
Yeah, they're like shamans. They're typically not happy campers.
Yeah.
They have these abilities, and they can't seem to control it. And unfortunately, they can't pinpoint it. But even if they could pinpoint it, what are you going to do? There's going to be an earthquake in Haiti. Are you going to evacuate the entire country? Is anybody going to listen to you?
Or there's going to be bombs at the Boston Marathon.
If it's personal, and you think there's going to be some disruption, some life-threatening situation, you and your friends and people can avoid being there, but you might not be able to do anything to change what's going to happen.
Right. Well, I think that this conversation has come up before in so many different venues, and the question becomes, why bother getting a hit, an intuitive hit or a precog, if you can't do anything about it? But then I think it may go deeper than that. It may not be for the purpose of doing something about it, but just to remind us how interconnected we are to this spectrum of reality. And that this continuum, that there's really no line of demarcation anywhere. It's very, very interesting. Say it again, because I have a feeling, Rob and Trish, that there are a lot of planetary empaths out there, a lot more than they know. What would some of the telltale signs be physically?
Well, some of them were quite severe. like bleeding from the ears, migraine headaches, nosebleeds, just a crippling exhaustion, strange sensations. It also depends on what kind of thing they're tuning in on. Sensations that run up and down their legs, a sense of vertigo.
Heart palpitations.
Yeah, heart palpitations.
Just
like one woman who has been able to tell when she's having symptoms that relate to a pending volcanic eruption because she feels this intense heat, which makes sense.
How long does it last?
Until the volcano erupts.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. For some of these people, this is a really unpleasant thing.
Oh no, of course.
And they have it in different, to varying degrees, but the ones who feel it the most suffer.
Here's a kind of list of some of the things: abdominal pains and discomfort, bleeding from the ears, clicking or ringing in the ears, extreme vertigo, heart palpitations, insomnia, migraines that last for days, nausea, nosebleeds, poltergeist phenomena, profound sadness, and strange, vivid, and powerful dreams about disasters, and tingling or vibrating that runs up and down the legs and arms.
Now, my only thing is I hope they're not getting these sensations at one time.
I mean, that would vary from person to person.
No.
Yeah. Well, we're hearing, it's interesting that we are hearing more and more people talk about what is referred to as tinnitus or ringing in the ear. And there's the conventional wisdom, so-called, of what that causes. And, to borrow from Whitley Strieber's comment, maybe we need to be throwing that in the trash and really looking at what's going on here, that we are literally tuning in to some impending event or something that's going on at the same time. It's just a fascinating thing. There was another question I wanted to ask you about that. Planetary empaths, I think that's a big deal.
Well, yeah, I do too, especially now.
Yeah. When was the last time you got a sort of a surge or enough to raise an eyebrow of people that were complaining of these symptoms?
I think it was before
Paris.
Oh, Paris.
Yeah, it was just one person, though, and she was just insistent. I think her story is in the book, just insistent of something coming up very soon, and it was going to be terrible and a disaster. And
but we hadn't heard from anybody else.
No, and that one we didn't hear anybody else, but she just kept emailing us and being very insistent, and then all of a sudden we heard it. And after that, her symptoms just vanished.
Yeah, so that was November 11th. Around 2015.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Again, I think the theme is consistent, everyone, that we are inextricably linked to everything.
And to everyone.
And to everyone, everything and everyone, all of consciousness, really, and the inanimate, etc. We'll never be able to delineate, I don't think, exactly how it works and put it in nice, neat little compartments, but maybe it's not meant to work that way.
I don't think you can compartmentalize this stuff that way.
You can't. Well, I'm going to borrow another Bohm quote that I've used on several occasions. He said, "We are like whirlpools in a stream. We have identity. We just do not have distinct borders."
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good one.
When I heard that, I thought, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes,
and
it really does.
Yeah. Listen, we only have, this is flying by. As I was going through your book, I'm like, should this be a 2-hour interview? Because you just have so much stuff here. But we don't, unfortunately. We only have about 7 to 10 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit. Let's go back and talk about the musicians. These musicians that oddly seem to presage their own deaths. It's a little dark, but I think it's worth probing a little bit. They presaged their own deaths through music and lyrics that they'd written and recorded. And you actually cite examples from John Lennon to Jimi Hendrix and even Lynyrd Skynyrd. I wasn't familiar with that whole Lynyrd Skynyrd story, and I love their music, actually. Grew up with it.
That's one of the strangest, this Lynyrd Skynyrd thing.
Yeah.
Apparently, in 1974, they released their second album, Second Helping. And it featured the band's biggest hit single, Sweet Home Alabama. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, that's one of those songs that makes you want to move. 3 years after Second Helping, the band released Street Survivors. The cover showed the band engulfed in flames, And that itself turned out to be a prescient image. 3 days later, on October 20th, the band took a Convair CB300 from Greenville, South Carolina, bound for Baton Rouge, and it crashed outside of Gillespie, Mississippi. The passengers have been told that one of the plane's engines had developed problems and were warned to brace for impact. Ronnie Van Zant, the lead vocalist and lyricist, and one of the founding members of the band, was killed on impact when the plane crashed into a tree. 5 other people also died, 2 band members, an assistant road manager, the pilot, and co-pilots. But in this story, the high strangeness didn't stop there, okay? One of the songs on this album is That Smell. And if you listen to it on YouTube, you're going to get chills because the lyrics address, even though the lyrics address drug usage, there's an undercurrent in the refrain, the smell of death surrounds you. So to me, that really, I mean, these guys knew.
Yeah, some part of them did for sure. Wow.
In the video, Ronnie Van Zant is spinning his hand around in the air as he sings, "The smell of death is around you."
Yes, around you.
Wow, that's heavy. Well, you know, when I read that in your book, and by the way, audience, I so encourage you to pick up a copy of this book because it is anecdote rich. And we love stories, and they just hit us in profound ways. But as I was reading that particular part on the Leonard Skinner situation, you know who else came to mind? If you recall the rapper that died many years ago, Biggie Smalls.
Right.
Who was tragically killed. And I looked this up yesterday. This was not his last album, but maybe a few years before his death, he released an album called Ready to Die.
Oh, jeez. Well, that's like poet Anne Sexton. Her last publication was the Death Notebooks.
And Jimi Hendrix wrote a song even before one of his first songs about the Ballad of Jimmy that predicted his own death. And it never appeared on any album, but
he recorded it with Curtis Knight.
Yeah, the song is dedicated to the memory of Jimmy.
Oh my goodness!
And it's such a famous person who is so influential. He was only around making music for four years.
Yeah, he's part of the 700 Club.
Yeah.
Or not the 700.
The 27 Club. The 700. The 20. We know what you mean, Trish. Maybe that was a precognition.
Maybe that was. Uh-oh.
Oh boy. Well, these are sad. We don't want to end on a sad note, but again, equally profound because I think for those of us that love to muse and contemplate, no guarantee we're going to come up with any definitive answer, certainly not from me, but it's worth saying, what is this all about? This is the one phrase that the Seth material brought out in me. What is this all about? What is life all about? How are we connected to it? There are no coincidences at all. Okay, there are a couple more things I want to get to. I'm looking at the clock, but I have to ask this. So all of these things we would kind of count in the quasi weird to high strangeness. But and you even caution the reader in the book at the beginning. You say it's going to get, if you think this is weird, it's going to get a little weirder. What would you say? I would put you on the spot, if I may, if you could think of one like really, really weird scenario. You have so many, I know, but if you could pick one.
Okay, I'm going to give you probably the most fascinating synchronicity I ever experienced.
Ooh, love it. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. In 1987, Rob and I were in Venezuela. Now, I was born and raised there, and this was the first time I had gone back since my family had left. We're standing in the Maiquetía, which is the airport in Caracas airport, and the place is really just a hub of soldiers with guns because Caracas at that time was a big hub for drugs coming in from Colombia. So we're in the security line, and there's a guy in front of us dressed in a three-piece suit and carrying a briefcase, and the guardsmen come up to him and say, open up that briefcase. We want to see what's in there. And so Rob and I were like, oh, is this guy a drug dealer? He looks like a drug dealer. So he opens up the briefcase. The only thing in there is a novel I wrote called Fevered, which fit this atmosphere in the place. But I wrote it under a pseudonym, Allison Drake. So it wasn't like I could even go up and tap this guy on the shoulder and say, hey, you got my book, you know? But I mean, well, what are the odds of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that was my best one.
Wow.
I had one that we had a cat named Fox, and Fox just disappeared one day, and after a couple of days, Trish started worrying because the cat wandered a little bit, but Trish really became concerned. After it was gone 2-3 days, she said, "I know something's wrong. Something's happened to Fox." And I said, I think this was like a Tuesday or Wednesday when she said that. I said, "The cat. I just had this strong impression. The cat is going to be back by midnight on Saturday." And so,
oh, sure, Rob.
we get a knock on our back door at midnight on Saturday, about 1 minute to.
Oh my God.
It's our next door neighbor, and she's holding Fox. She said he was right out here in the courtyard, and there he was, and his paws were all scratched up. He had been and he smelled like perfume.
Oh my
God!
Somebody had taken her.
Somebody had taken her, and she somehow had clawed out and made her way out and got away and came home.
Isn't
but
that
it was just right to the minute.
To the minute. Listen, everyone, if these stories aren't enough to turn you on your ear, and then when you turn right side up, think, I'm going to figure this out, because this is pretty cool. Think of all the things, whether we understand it or not, that we, again, are so linked to, that we can do. We can sense the future. We can tap our intuition, and we can read signs from the universe to predict what's to come. And if you don't believe me, read this book, Sensing the Future. Listen, Rob and Trish MacGregor, it is always a pleasure. And it's been way too long. We can't go another 3 years. I can't believe it's been 3 years, because I know
you're so much fun to talk to, Alexis.
Likewise, we could go on forever. We're going to continue after we sign off, hopefully for a few minutes. But I want to thank you once again. And audience, be sure to visit. We will make sure to have all the links, and we're going to have some great relevant links because there's so many stories just in this 1 hour. And of course, a link to the book. Tell us the when and where we can get it. The book.
It's going to be available tomorrow, January 10th. Major bookstores, Amazon, wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold. An ebook as well as hardback?
Yeah.
The ebook.
Yeah, the ebook, everything.
And in print, too. I'll be available.
Well, I'm going to recommend the one you can hold in your hands. I was saying to Rob and Trish, it's actually a really neat sort of oversized book, and it's really worthy of a coffee table display. And I'm going to give the suggestion that you buy the hard copy of this book and you put it on your coffee table, and you invite your family over, for the people that never, ever, ever talk about these things. And I guarantee you they're going to notice that cover because it's so beautiful and big. So go get that book, everyone. Rob and Trish, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Higher Journeys Radio. And again, Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Happy New Year.
Could it be that not only are we glimpsing the future through precognition, but writing our own lives as we go along? The stories that both Trish and Rob told of the numerous accounts of those who, whether writing lyrics or a fictional narrative, something about the act of creating may be providing a template for a real-life playout. Though some of the instances they cited had dire consequences, the overarching theme is that not only do we sense the future, we create our real-life storyline and then play the starring role. Sensing the Future: How to Tap Your Intuition and Read Signs from the Universe to Predict What's to Come is fresh off the presses, and I urge you to get yourself a copy and learn more about the wondrous and mysterious world of precognition and intuition. Thank you so much for tuning in to this, our first episode of Higher Journeys for the new year. Until next time, I'm your host, Alexis Brooks.